Okay.
Eleven questions. Ready?
I'm ready.
Oh, cell phone's off, in case,
I should turn mine off?
yeah.
Okay. Oh, in case it rings. Of course, in this building, it's just as good as being off. That's why when I picked up, you probably didn't hear me because I was in my office. Okay, it's off.
You still in focus? Good.
Yeah.
Can you tell us your name, your profession, where you teach, and what you teach?
My name is Josh Ashenmiller. I'm an instructor of history at Fullerton College. I teach U.S. history.
And Josh, in the context of 50 years of U.S. history, what was the significance, or what was significant about the '69 Santa Barbara oil spill?
It was one of the biggest environmental catastrophes that happened in the United States after World War II. And because of that, it really galvanized a local movement in Santa Barbara, but also attracted nationwide attention amongst environmentalists.
Josh, how did the '69 oil spill transform local, state, and national politics?
Think about that for a second.
Oh, and when you reply, try to remember to reply with the question as part
Of the answer.
Oh, okay.
the
Like
spill transformed.
Right.
Like a, what do they call those questions on tests?
A prompt.
No, essay question.
An essay question.
No, okay. Put the question in the answer.
The kinds that I ask, yeah. Well, I would say that...
Let's take it from the top. How
Sure.
did the '69 oil spill transform local, state, and national politics?
Well, certainly the '69 oil spill transformed local politics probably the most at first. It changed Santa Barbara from being a town that was mostly wealthy and fairly conservative in its political outlook to taking a pretty radical look at the way decisions were made at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. It changed state politics because the State Lands Commission took a more active role in regulating the leasing and drilling for oil on the Outer Continental Shelf. And it had an effect even on federal policy. About 1 year after the spill happened, President Richard Nixon signed the National Environmental Policy Act in 1970, and in that same year also signed the act that created the Environmental Protection Agency. And it wasn't all due to the oil spill, but the oil spill was a major factor in those changes.
Great. How did the '69 Santa Barbara oil spill, what effect did the '69 Santa Barbara oil spill have on the various bureaucracies?
The '69 spill certainly changed bureaucracy at the state level and the federal level. At the federal level, the Department of the Interior was frankly ashamed of what happened. In fact, Interior Secretary Stuart Udall came to Santa Barbara a year after the spill at a conference that was devised there by environmentalists and basically apologized for the lease sale that resulted in the oil rigs. So it totally changed the culture of the Interior Department. The state became much more active through the State Lands Commission, and locally the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors became completely hostile to the oil industry. One of the executives at Union Oil complained a few years later that OPEC was easier to deal with than the Santa Barbara Board of Supervisors. So I think it changed all three levels.
Very nice. I hadn't heard that story.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of legislative priorities, in your opinion, where does environmental legislation stand, especially in the context of the California coastline?
That's a hard question. When you say in the grand scheme of legislative priorities, do you mean currently now in 2011?
And if you want to limit it to, say, California legislative priorities, the Humanities Council wants to see this in terms of the California coastline, but after reading your papers, we realized that you had a much broader perspective of all of this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a total expert on California itself, but
then let's do it in terms of where does environmental legislation stand in the context of all legislation? what's its priority in comparison to the others?
I see what you're saying, okay. Unfortunately, I think environmental legislation tends to float down the list of priorities when economic concerns rise up the list of priorities. As we've seen in the last couple of years with the economic recession, environmental protection consistently in opinion polls and consistently in what legislators do takes a back seat to problems like unemployment, national security, the price of oil, the price of gasoline. I mean, there's no better evidence of that, I think, than the fact that when you drive by the Santa Barbara Channel today, there are still dozens of oil rigs out there pumping oil. And there's even been a recent call to increase the amount of oil that they're producing to try to bring down the price of oil.
Although the Gulf oil spill did not quite follow your 10-year disaster pattern, what impact do you think it will have on environmental policymaking?
So when the Gulf spill, you mean last year's?
The BP.
Right, the BP spill, right. That's a good question. I think the BP oil spill will have a definite impact on current discussions about energy security. And President Obama, just a few weeks before the BP oil spill, announced that he was going to increase the amount of oil drilling on federal offshore leases, not just in California, but also in the Gulf and off the East Coast. So he quickly backtracked on that as soon as the BP oil spill started last April. So it's definitely having a dampening effect on the search for new oil on U.S.-controlled land. There's no question about that.
In your opinion, how will the love affair between Americans and hydrocarbons end?
That's a great question. How will the love affair between Americans and hydrocarbons end? Well, as I've always tried to say, I don't see it as much of a love affair, because a love affair to me implies reciprocity, and your car will never love you, no matter how much you love your car. To me, it's much more of an infatuation or a fetish. But there's never going to be a day when the last drop of oil is mined out of the earth, because long before that day happens, it'll be so expensive that companies won't see it as profitable to keep pumping oil out of the earth. So it's going to end because of high prices, not because of scarcity, really. Those are two sides of the same coin, but they are a little bit different. And as a historian, I hate to make predictions. So I'm not going to say 50 years, 100 years. I do say that I'm very ambivalent. When I see the price of gasoline go up, I'm secretly dismayed because I have to drive a lot. But I'm also thrilled because I think maybe this is going to increase demand for public transit and hybrid cars, electric vehicles, train travel. So I think we're going to get there through the price mechanism.
Great. In your opinion, what is the probability that the U.S. will ever achieve energy independence? And why are you comfortable with that prediction?
Do I predict that the U.S. will ever achieve energy independence? I think it will eventually, because the age of hydrocarbon will come to an end at some point. I'm not willing to predict whether it will take the next 50 years or the next 100 years, but at some point, people are still going to demand automobility. People are still going to demand heated houses and hot water heaters, and the U.S. will just have to figure out some way to do it without having to mine the energy out of the earth.
If you were standing in front of an audience of 500 graduating high school students, what would you tell them is the single most important environmental action they can undertake?
Let me think about that. Okay.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, no, I got it. And I'll try to work the question into the answer. If I were giving a high school commencement address to 500 students, and they wanted to know what was the most important economic decision I can make, I would advise them where you choose to live. And not just where in the world you choose to live, but what local choice you make. How far away you are from your work, how far away you are from the places you want to go for leisure activities, for running errands. I think that has the most impact. Transport is really the biggest use of hydrocarbons and source of global warming. So if you can do that on foot, by bike, by public transit, I think you have the largest, I think if you do it that way, then you shrink your carbon footprint the most.
Let's take that from the top. I think it's a really good answer.
Okay.
But my only concern was
It was too long, yeah.
You said it was an economic question as opposed to an environmental
Oh,
question.
sorry.
So is
Sorry.
it Is it an economic versus an environmental?
I think they're very much intertwined. I mean,
Okay.
economics is the way we provide, ourselves with food, water, clothing, shelter, and that stuff all comes from the earth.
Well, then we can leave it at that. You comfortable?
I could do it again if you want me to.
All right. One quick thing. Scrunched a little bit for the forward. If you see her move, you're not comfortable, in the middle of your question, I should have told you this before. There's a focus button right there. If you press it, it goes to, am I putting my finger on the right button? If you press it, it goes to autofocus, puts it in focus, and then you can go back to manual. And then keeps it in.
Okay,
It should be, that number should be around 82.
okay.
So if he moves, you want to change it. All right.
Sorry.
If you were standing in front of a class of 500 graduating high school students, what would you tell them is the single most important environmental decision they can undertake?
My advice to high school students, if they wanted to, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. My advice to high school students for protecting the environment would be to think hard about where you live. And I don't just mean where in the world you live or what city you live in, but where your local location is going to be. Are you going to be close to where you work? Are you going to be close to the places you travel to and from on a daily basis? Your transport decisions, I think, have the biggest effect on shrinking your carbon footprint.
Great. If you received a call from President Obama and he asked you for advice on his next big environmental initiative, what would you tell him to do?
If the president called me and asked for environmental advice, I would advise him to invest heavily in high-speed rail. I think most of the carbon burning in this country happens for people taking plane flights and long car trips when they would just as soon take a high-speed rail trip instead.
That's really good. If you have a few more minutes, there are a couple like curiosity questions more.
Sure.
How did Nixon get all that environmental legislation through the Congress? Who spearheaded, what happened in the House? You mentioned the senator from Boeing in that paper, but
Henry Jackson, right.
right. But
Right.
who was obviously he had bipartisan support.
Mm-hmm.
Was that natural, or was it like coerced, or if you could talk
Talk a
about
little
that?
bit about that.
Sure, it was not natural.
Look at me when you do.
Sorry. Nixon was able to sign so many important pieces of legislation in part because he was a rival of some members of Congress who were going to run for president or were planning on making a presidential run in 1972. The best example is actually Ed Muskie, the senator from Maine, who was most responsible for pushing through the water pollution control amendments of 1972, which also have Nixon's signature on them. Nixon wanted to be ahead of Muskie on this issue, and Muskie wanted to be ahead of Nixon. So it wasn't really a spirit of bipartisan cooperation, it was really rivalry, which probably explains just about everything that Nixon did anyway. So it's consistent with the view of Nixon as being very partisan first and environmentalist purely by accident.
What kind of things did he do from an environmental perspective?
His signature is on the National Environmental Policy Act, which is today the most important federal law on how federal agencies have to protect the environment. His signature is also on the act that created the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. His signature is on the Clean Air Act amendments of 1970, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1972, the Endangered Species Act of 1973. These acts together are probably the most litigated environmental law in U.S. history.
Last big question. What in your opinion, is the next big environmental battle to be fought?
Water, probably.
Tell me about it.
I think the next big environmental battle to be fought will be over the scarcity of drinking water, of water supplies. Not just in the United States, especially in the arid West, but throughout the world. Arid regions of the world are experiencing the fastest population growth and are running into serious scarcity issues. And it's going to be expensive to desalinate water. It's going to be expensive to mine deeper for the water that's available.
You have any questions?
I guess just kind of a general question.
Come on over here, sit here. Let me-
Okay. me try to phrase it better as a question myself. It'd be about, you know, the U.S. and our role now in renewable energy.
Mhm.
In the 70s, the U.S. was the leader in solar energy.
Right.
And then when Reagan came in, it all fell apart.
Sure.
Meanwhile, Japan and Germany have continued with more continuity in that direction.
Mhm.
Do you see the United States ever catching up again with Germany and Japan and even China on development and manufacturing of renewable energy systems?
I think looking at it historically, there's no reason why the United States can't catch up with other countries when it comes to solar energy. The United States had to play catch up on railroads. The United States had to play catch up with the Industrial Revolution, in the chemical manufacturing revolution around the turn of the 20th century. In almost all those cases, they started in other places. But what gave the United States an advantage was usually a very concerted effort at government investment, investing in the research, investing in the infrastructure. There's no reason that can't happen again.
You think it's happening now with Obama's administration?
It's changed course. You were right in saying that it began to decline with the Reagan Revolution, which said that if there's a market for these things, we'll leave it up to the market. Obama's being a little more proactive and saying that we have to lay the groundwork for the market to happen through research investment and infrastructure investment. So yes, there's been a definite change in ideology with the election of Barack Obama. How much of an effect that's having on the ground, it's too early to say.
And if you're comfortable talking about this on camera, great. If you're not, what do you think about EDC and the PXP controversy?
The deal that they made? Yeah, right. I wasn't paying attention to the details of it, but I have to say it's one of the consequences I think the environmental movement has paid when you embark on a strategy of using the law and creating something like the EDC. The EDC is a staff of lawyers. They think of terms of what is possible under the law, and sometimes what is possible is a swap or a compromise, which is basically what they had to make in that recent controversy. So it's entirely consistent with the way the EDC has operated. In the past, they've been a little bit more confrontational, and now it seems that they have some people on the other side of the table they can bargain with. But I don't think anybody should be surprised at the outcome. It didn't surprise me, but I was a little bit surprised at the vociferousness of the criticism that was launched at EDC. Criticize the industry, but don't criticize the lawyers that you've basically deputized to go negotiate with them.
Okay, that's fair enough. Okay. Well, I'm really pleased. You know, you're really good at this.
Really? Okay.
Yes,
I feel like I'm not good at this
no,
one.
you're not. You're very good at this.
What was good about what you said was we've been trying to capture a historical perspective from local people. So they don't have a macro, a macroeconomic, macro-political, macro-environmental perspective. And what
Right.
we've added to that is that macro look.
Oh,
and
good.
The context of how it all fit into that. So it's very, very good.
Great, fabulous. I'm glad I could help.
And maybe we should think of producing some of those distance learning products with you.
Sure. I've never actually taught online. And frankly, I'm a little bit dubious of it. I kind of, because I do so much, it does, I do so much in-class discussion, though I wonder how I could transfer
It works
that.
for some students, and it doesn't work for others.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've had not a million, I'm exaggerating, but I've had many, many discussions. My sister is a college professor.
Oh, really?
In, religion and psychology.
Uh-huh.
She
I'll take care.
She just says, when students who are, the kind of student who is good at reading from a book fairly independently is good at distance learning.
Right.
But the student who really needs to be engaged, personally nudged, they're not. So they're hybrids that are actually, going to be what is produces the best result.
Yeah, we have some of those here on campus too. It meets on campus one day a week or once a month. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to it. I mean, first of all, there's no point in being opposed to it. Like, it's happening, it's growing, colleges love it. It's a booming part of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good thing. I mean, this is going to actually make college education available to some people who otherwise might not be able to do it because they're working 2 jobs or they have some kind of disability, they're
Right.
homebound. You know,
Yeah.
why not make it available
Well,
to them?
and as we've been discussing all day, transportation.
And that
You
too.
know,
Uh-huh.
you
Look at the parking lot. Yeah, right.
drive all the way, find a parking lot, drive home.
Oh, it drives me crazy. I mean, and the college, we do so little to encourage people to do something other than drive. I mean,
Uh-huh.
there are several bus lines that come up and down the street, but we haven't made it easy for the students to figure out how to use them. We don't have bike racks anywhere for them to park their bikes. We could be doing a lot more. I mean, for employees, we do pretty well. I get a nice check every month for taking the train every day.
Oh, good.
So that's a great incentive, but
Right.
there's really nothing, there's no incentive for the students,
Mhm.
other than the lack of parking spaces, which drives some of them to do it.
Right,
I've always been say, oh, I gotta start riding my bike because it's so much easier, but
right.
the vast majority of them try to drive.
Mhm.
It's a major problem.
One of the things that is working in my, you always have a huge pile of things you want to try to make happen, and,
Yeah.
well, we're making this happen, but one of the other things that been having discussions with for quite a long time is, I'm on the board of New Mexico Solar Energy Association, which is an educational nonprofit.
You're based in
Going back
Albuquerque?
To 1972.
Oh, wow.
And I'm also on part of a Media Arts Collaborative Charter School in Albuquerque.
Wow.
And we've been talking for quite a long time, I'll skip the intricacies, of creating a solar energy distance learning project based on an unpublished textbook manuscript